Hi, I'm Jim Fielding, and welcome to Jim Fielding and Friends, a podcast where we explore what it truly means to live and lead with authenticity, kindness, and impact. Each episode brings together leaders who inspire me, people who lead with heart, break barriers, and redefine success. If you're looking for honest, insightful, and thought-provoking conversations, pull up a chair. Let's talk.
We can choose who we love. Nobody's letting go. Chosen family.
Well, first off, I think that's what America is. Like, that's what I've been frustrated about lately is, you know, all of this, make America great again, like build walls, not bridges, like all that kind of stuff. And when I think of America, we used to call ourselves the melting pot, right? Mm-hmm. We used to call ourselves, read what's on the Statue of Liberty, read, the Declaration of Independence. And we used to celebrate diversity. We used to celebrate that tapestry and like all the different ways we looked, and people who grew up rural and people who grew up urban and people who grew up wealthy and people who grew up not wealthy, and the West and the East and the South. And I've now living in the South, the first time I've ever lived in the South, but I've been in the Midwest. I've lived in the West. I've lived in the South now. And we used to celebrate our differences.
We used to think it was strategic.
We did.
We
thought it was a strength.
We very much thought it was a strength. And growing up, I remember I had a friend, Nadine, who was Bangladeshi growing up next to me when I was probably 13, 14, 15. And I think about all the positive impact that having her grow up next to me did for me. When I was younger than that, living in Kansas, I lived in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and my best friend for a while was a guy named Homer Leonard. Homer, I hope you are out there in the world and hear this. Homer in my little tiny Kansas Army school was far from the only black kid in my school. It was an Army base. There was a lot of racial and ethnic diversity on the base. Homer was my best friend and at the time. And, whereas I didn't know to think as a 17, 18, 19-year-old that my interactions with my peers were informed by having him as my best friend as a kid, I did learn that lesson when I saw people whose experiences weren't informed by similar experiences as my own. You can tell when someone's never left their front porch. Yeah. And in fact, as someone who does civil rights, I often like to remind people that the two leading indicators in America of how a person will view equality, how they will view civil rights, are formal education and travel. And not because you're ever taught what equality looks like, it's that you have an opportunity to experience it. Yeah. Travel teaches us either that we are all special or none of us are. Yeah. When you don't travel, you think you are one thing and everybody is something else. And that's wrong. I guarantee you right now that if you dropped both of us off in almost any country in the world, you would find parents who wanted the most for their kids. Yeah. You would find somebody who was trying to both work hard, but also find time to be creative. You would find somebody that was grieving. You would find someone that was sick. You would find someone that was finding joy. All of those things are really universal, right?
Yes,
human beings.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me is that, to the point you were making earlier also, is that one of the great sort of American values is that overcoming hardship teaches us lessons that make us better. Any person you point to and say, where does your gumption, your character, your grit come from? They'll tell you about some hardship that they had to overcome. Even if they've never had any hardship in their life, they will invent a hardship and then tell you how they overcame it, because we value the overcoming. We know how important that is to a point. We stop the moment we somehow look at people of color. We look at immigrants. We look at people who have so many opportunities to overcome hardship and frankly often do and have. And yet somehow it's like we value a hardship journey up until a certain level of privilege. And then when real hardship starts to kick in, we don't value that hardship journey. I find it is such a weird dichotomy about America that we say we believe in determination, hard work, and grit. Yeah. And the most determined, the hardest working, the people around us that have to put the most into their day are the people that are often marginalized, ignored, and sort of kicked out.
The immigrant community.
The immigrant community. Yeah. Which, by the way, for all of the marginalization that the right is throwing towards the immigrant community in so many different ways. I was just reminded very recently about the billions, the tens, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars that immigrants put into in tax dollars into the economy, let alone the massive amounts of work, right? And it's it's a mistake to justify the value of the immigrant community, of the immigrant population on America based on any economic measure. But it is also a truism to combat lies about the economic impacts of the immigrant community. I can say that I am a better person. I'm a better American. America is better because of immigrants. In fact, it's one of the greatest things that we have that other countries don't.
This is why I love you so much.
Right.
Because it's so funny. When you were talking, I was thinking of Meadowvale Elementary School in Toledo, Ohio, where I went, where every year we used to have International Day. And that meant you brought a dish
from your heritage.
From your heritage, right? And, Toledo, Ohio, blue collar, auto industry, the whole bit. And we would have the Polish food and the German food and the Italian food and the Mexican food. And we wore little costumes and we celebrated that. And that's the thing that I think is so silly about a lot of this discussion about immigration. And I know how serious immigration is. I'm not trying to diminish it. Is we are all immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, literally, unless you are indigenous, and you can track yourself back. And there are many people who are indigenous to America. I grew up knowing I was German, Irish, and Welsh. And I knew when my people came, right? We're Irish potato famine people, right? So we're 1800s for the most part. And yeah, I was a Toledoan and I was a third generation Toledoan, but I always said I'm German, Irish, and Welsh, proudly. Yeah. Even when they made fun of me for being Welsh in Britain because we were the coal miners, right? And they're
sure.
Oh, you're Welsh, whatever. But it's so funny that we've lost it. And but literally it was an elementary school thing and we looked forward to it. And it was this smorgasbord and we'd have Persian food and we'd have African food because Toledo with the auto industry was truly a melting pot. And a public school in Toledo was a melting pot. And I just don't understand when that became bad.
The sort of gatekeeping about what heritage is acceptable and what heritage is not. Yeah. There are 50 million Spanish-speaking Americans. 50 million people in the United States speak another language, a superpower, being a polyglot, being able to speak another, being able to communicate with people in a whole other way than the way that you and I are limited in communicating with each other. And yet we have a government that thinks that's a bad thing, that would vilify people for that. Were it not for Native Americans and a language that was suppressed, we wouldn't have won a world war. And how quickly we learn the lessons about the strength that diversity provides for all of us. It makes sense in economies and ecologies that diversity begets strength. Diversity begets more opportunities to learn and grow from one another than a sort of a myopic approach of singleness.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this show, make sure you leave a review, subscribe, and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you and look forward to seeing you soon.
Choose who we